Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, today I finished watching Umar Johnson's interview on the Breakfast Club, and I just want to take some time right now to share my thoughts about it. Um, it was an interesting interview. There are some things that I agree with Umar Johnson on, and there are other things that I don't agree with him on. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to point out some things that he said that were outright false, things that he said that I disagree with. And, I welcome your feedback and your comments. Before I get started, I want to shout out Cali Guy because he did a video where he was talking about Umar Johnson's interview on the Breakfast Club, and that really inspired me to go ahead and check out Umar Johnson's interview. So I watched it, and before I even watched it, I saw an article that was posted on The Root. I will include a link to that article in the description box so that you can read it for yourself. That article points out several things that Umar Johnson said that were false. And I'm going to summarize some of those things, and then I'm going to show you the article and just show you the sources that they rely upon. So here we go. So this is the article that I was referring to. It's entitled Everything You Wanted to Know About the Umar Johnson Memes, but Were Afraid to Ask. And this article is some of it is silly and disrespectful and all that kind of stuff. But at the end, they raised some interesting points about things that Umar Johnson said that were false. And I just want to take some time to point out these things. The first thing that they point out is how Umar Johnson said that Chinese is the official language or an official language in South Africa. And this article points out how that's completely false. And it links to this article right here, which lists the 11 official languages in South Africa. And this is the title of the article, The Languages of South Africa. And if you look through this, you will see that Chinese is not one of the official languages in South Africa. So that's one thing that Umar Johnson said that was false. And again, I have to ask, why did he make a false statement like this? Did he not know, or was he just making things up, or was he just misinformed? The next point that they discuss in this article is Umar Johnson saying that black men marry out of their race more than all other races combined. Again, this is another exaggeration, another false statement that Umar Johnson made during this interview. And you will see here, there's the statistics for intermarriage. And it points out how American Indians marry outside of their race more than any other group of people at 58%. For African Americans, it's at 19%. And then when you look at a breakdown in terms of gender, you will see that 54% of American Indians, men, marry outside of their race compared to 25% of black men. And just by that alone, it's clear and obvious that black men do not marry outside of their race more than other groups of people combined. So that's the second point. And also another point that was raised during the interview is this. Umar Johnson said that the word Buddha is translated the black face. Again, that's another falsehood. And here's the link that actually defines Buddha. It says, awakened, enlightened, to awake, know, perceive, is aware, observes, understands, and it has other definitions. The black face is not one of those definitions. So again, that's another false statement that he made during the interview. And during this interview, as during many of his presentations, he talks about being a descendant of Frederick Douglass. Why he does this, I don't know, because the family, the actual descendants of Frederick Douglass, say this: we can tell you with 100% certainty that he is not a descendant of Frederick Douglass. So again, the question is, why does he constantly tell people that he is a descendant of Frederick Douglass without providing any kind of proof? Why does he continue to do this in the face of the fact that you have the actual descendants saying that this man is not a descendant of Frederick Douglass? All these things raise questions about credibility. And, this article also talks about this whole issue about whether or not Umar Johnson has a doctorate. This is a controversy that's been going around for quite some time. Many people have raised this issue. And this is an issue that shouldn't even be able to be raised. I mean, if someone has the actual proof. I mean, this issue would have been laid to rest a long time ago if Umar Johnson simply presented his paperwork proving that he has a degree. I mean, for instance, if someone asked me to prove that I received a bachelor's of arts in political science or that I've received a Juris Doctorate, all I could do is just take a picture of my degrees and show them for the whole world. If someone wanted to have proof that I received certain licenses to practice law in various jurisdictions, all I have to do is take a photograph of those certificates, of those licenses for the whole world to see, and that lays it to rest. And if people want to go even further and they want to contact the schools or they want to contact the bar associations, they can easily do that to find out and to confirm that I do, in fact, have those degrees. And I can't understand why this man hasn't been able to lay this controversy to rest. People shouldn't still be talking about this, if there's actual proof. Now, I know that there was some information presented that this man actually submitted a dissertation, but that is not actual proof of having the doctorate degree. This is something that should have been handled a long time ago and should have been laid to rest with actual proof if he in fact has this degree. And this raises serious questions. So now I'm going to go into some additional points that I got from this interview. Now, in addition to the things that the Root mentioned, here are some things that I noticed that were just outright false. Some things that Umar Johnson said that were false. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge the things that I do agree with Umar Johnson on. Obviously, I'm supportive of Pan-Africanism and Black nationalism. I support those ideologies in general. Now, I don't necessarily support some of his interpretation of those ideologies, but I support Pan-Africanism. The idea that African people are one people, that African people need to unite worldwide, that Africa must be free and united and powerful. So I support that notion. I support the notion of Black nationalism, meaning that Black people should own and control the institutions in the Black community. We should own and control the businesses in our community, things that Malcolm X talked about years ago. So I support Pan-Africanism and Black nationalism. I also support Black love. I support the notion of Black men being with Black women and Black women being with Black men. So on those points, I agree with Umar Johnson on, but I want to highlight some things, some additional things that he said that were just outright wrong. He talked about Obama and Trump, and he basically said that under Trump, you're going to get the same thing that you got under Obama, which is nothing. That's what he said that Black people will get under Trump and what Black people got under Obama. I just think that that is just outright ridiculous on its face. Anybody who has studied the Obama administration, who is familiar with politics, knows that for the most part, there are night and day differences between what the Obama administration has done and what the Trump administration plans to do. I wrote an article on my blog outlining how the Trump administration has basically declared war on Black and poor people. I will include a link in the card so that you can read that article for yourself. That article points out how Trump has decided to review all those consent decrees entered with police departments that have a history of racial profiling and police brutality. And we know just from history, we know from the legal system that that is one of the few ways that you can actually create reforms in police departments. And that's by having a legally enforceable consent decree that you can go to court and force, the police department to comply with. But now, under Trump, all of that is called into question because you have a U.S. Attorney General who wants to review all of those consent decrees. You have a U.S. Attorney General who has talked about the how consent decrees do not benefit the police. You know, he's talked about how it hampers police and their law enforcement efforts and all that kind of stuff. It condemns police for the actions of a few. So you have an administration that is trying to roll back these consent decrees and does not plan to enter any future consent decrees under their watch. So that's one thing. And then when you compare that to what Obama administration has done, I mean, the Obama administration has not only investigated incidents of police brutality, they have investigated police departments, they have uncovered patterns and practices of discrimination against Black people, patterns and practices of excessive use of force. And what they have done is enter consent decrees against those police departments. So you can't tell me that you're getting the same thing under Obama and Trump. That's just straight up false. When you look at the whole war on drugs and the approach of the Trump administration compared to the Obama administration, there is no comparison. The Trump administration wants to ratchet up the war on drugs. They want to have harsher penalties for people who use and sell drugs. They want to roll back some of the changes and reforms that the Obama administration implemented to try to correct this problem of mass incarceration. The Obama administration implemented reforms designed to lessen the sentences that people face for minor nonviolent drug offenses. But here you have a Trump administration that wants to even increase the penalties, wants to have aggressive policing tactics deployed in Black communities at a time when crime is going down. But yet you have people like Umar Johnson actually having the audacity to say that these two administrations are essentially the same and you're not going to get anything from them. And then you have this Trump administration that wants to suppress Black voters and Latino voters by, imposing this so-called commission designed to investigate voter fraud. And it's headed up by people who are notorious for implementing restrictive voter laws in their jurisdictions. So what you're going to have at the end of the day is heightened restrictions that make it more difficult for Black people, brown people, and other people who tend to vote for Democrats and others who are not Republicans. They're going to make it more difficult for them to vote. When you compare that to the Obama administration's track record of fighting to protect voter rights, fighting, for instance, in the Shelby County versus Holder case, fighting, for instance, in Texas, and being supportive of litigation in North Carolina involving restrictive laws designed to suppress Black voters, the Obama administration fought those things, whereas you have this Trump administration that is protecting and trying to promote, those kind of laws designed to suppress Black voters. So to say that these two are one and the same and they're not going to do anything for Black people is preposterous. I mean, when you look at what the Obama administration did in terms of its executive order on Black excellence in education, in terms of the Brothers Keepers program, in terms of fighting to protect affirmative action, when you look at those measures, it is just straight up false to say that the Obama administration did nothing for Black people. And when you compare that to the Trump administration that plans to cut food stamps, plans to cut Section 8, plans to get rid of health insurance, 22 million people will lose their health insurance if Trump has his way in terms of getting this health care bill passed. So if you look at all that, it is just straight up ridiculous to suggest that they're one and the same. It is ridiculous to suggest that Obama has given or done nothing for Black people. It's ridiculous to suggest that is just like a Trump administration. I mean, it's just patently ridiculous. I mean, when you look at the Obamacare system and how many millions of people were able to get insurance because of that plan, it is just fake and false to say that Obama has done nothing for black people, and to compare Obama to Trump, it's ridiculous. So I take issue with that. Also, I take issue with his point about the Constitution. He said that it's basically unconstitutional for African Americans to be considered citizens. And he said that based on the fact that many of the framers didn't view African Americans obviously as citizens. In fact, many of the framers owned slaves and all that kind of stuff. So on a basic, simple level, I understand the point that he's trying to make, but the fact of the matter is we are American citizens. The 14th Amendment of the Constitution made black people American citizens. The 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendment gave us certain rights that made us citizens. So this notion that we are not citizens is just false. I mean, it's just false. The Constitution made us citizens. You know, the Constitution is a living document. It's not some document that's just stuck in time. It's a document that can be amended. It's a document that can be interpreted in a way that is relevant to today's time, space, and reality, as you know, my imam says when he uses that phrase. But it's a living document, and we are American citizens. That's why we have certain rights in this country. We have the Bill of Rights and all that kind of stuff. We have certain constitutional rights because we are American citizens. And that isn't to say, obviously, that we don't suffer discrimination, obviously, that we're not treated differently and all that kind of stuff, and we still don't have issues to overcome and improve in this country. But the fact of the matter is, we are American citizens. So I don't know why he's presenting this false notion that we're not American citizens or that the Constitution it's unconstitutional for us to be considered citizens. When you have an amendment process, the Constitution was amended to make us citizens. So, I mean, and I just find it odd that these people that say how we're not Americans and all this and that, you know, I find it odd that none of these people who say this, none of them renounce their citizenship. None of them decide, well, I'm leaving America and I'm going to live in, you know, an African country or something like that. You see Umar Johnson, after he goes to all these countries, he comes back to Philadelphia, he comes back to the United States, and he enjoys all the rights and privileges as an American citizen. So, I mean, I just think that we got to move beyond theatrics and deal with reality. Also, another thing that came up during his interview on the Breakfast Club was this question of solutions. You know, he's very articulate when it comes to articulating and discussing the problem. But when it came down to solutions, I found that his response was very weak. And basically, he said that it all boils down to us. He was talking about how it's about our mentality. You know, it's about us having self-hatred issues and all that kind of stuff. He said that the problem was totally mental. You know, the problem was totally mental, and all we had to do is basically change our attitude and learn to love one another and all that kind of stuff, basically. And, you know, my response to that is simple. You know, this problem is not about black people's mentality. It's not just about, you know, black people being pathological or black people not having the right values or black people having enough pride. And I think that those types of arguments are in line with a lot of conservative ideology that tries to blame victims. And you will find that a lot of this stuff, a lot of these talking points that some of these black nationalists make are in line with the talking points of these black Republicans, these far right-wing conservative black Republicans that many of us call coons. Our problem is not some problem that's just in our mind. The criminal justice system is not some problem that's in our mind. The police killing black people with impunity is not some problem that's imagined in our mind. The wealth disparity between black people and white people is not some problem that's in our mind that can be solved by us thinking our way out of it or just changing our attitude and our perspective. Our problems are deeper than that. Our problems are more complex than that. And I think that what you have here is microwave intellectualism, where people are all about sound bites instead of dealing with the actual comprehensive nature of the problem and actually presenting actual steps towards a solution. I mean, Umar Johnson, he's a great speaker. You know, he has a lot of charisma and all that kind of stuff. And for the most part, he is more along the lines of being an entertainer as opposed to being an actual leader and organizer. I mean, besides his speaking engagements, besides touring and giving various lectures and selling books, I guess, and other products and appearing on various shows, he's not organizing black people to do anything. He's not encouraging black people to join a particular organization with a particular political platform. He's not pushing for any kind of lobbying changes or any kind of real change. He's talked about a school. He's been raising funds for a school for years. And he's constantly talking about how it's going to be located in this place or that place. He's looked at this school and that school. But here we are all these years later, and there is no school. And that raises questions. I mean, the bottom line is this. You know, the brother is not an organizer. You know, this brother doesn't have concrete solutions to the problems that our people face. The brother is not a mobilizer. He's not really doing anything besides talking. You know, the brother talked about different types of Pan-Africanism. And he mentioned a couple of names. He mentioned W.E.B. DuBois, and he mentioned Stokely Carmichael, who would later be known as Kwame Ture. He talked about how they were socialists and they were of the socialist branch of Pan-Africanism, and he's of the nationalist branch of Pan-Africanism. And I want to go into that a little bit later, but for now, I'll just say this. Those men that he mentioned, those were organizers. Those were people actually doing something to affect change. They were not entertainers. They were not celebrities. They were people actually putting in work for black people. You had W.E.B. DuBois, who founded the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization. The brother also organized Pan-African conferences, you know, where you had all these African leaders from around the world getting together to create a political agenda, a worldwide political agenda for the liberation of African people from colonialism and neocolonialism. That brother was an organizer. You know, Kwame Ture, who was earlier known as Stokely Carmichael, was an organizer. He was an instrumental part of the organization SNCC, a well-known civil rights organization that fought against segregation, fought for voting rights and other civil rights. They were on the front lines fighting for our people. The brother worked with the Black Panther Party, a revolutionary organization in our community that put in work, that laid their lives on the line for black people. He worked with the Black Panthers. And later, this brother would go on to work with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So he wasn't going to places for his own self-glorification. He wasn't giving speeches to talk about how he's the prince of Pan-Africanism. He wasn't talking about how big and important he was. He was focused on the struggle. He was focused on organization. He was focused on recruiting people to join organizations. He wasn't out there boosting his own ego. He was out there fighting on the front lines for black people, for an actual Pan-Africanist organization that was out about the unification and liberation of Africa under scientific socialism. So the brother put in work. And, you know, I just see when he mentioned those names, I mean, I think that those are real Pan-African leaders. You know, and this brother Umar Johnson, I mean, he's good for what he's good for in terms of giving speeches that inspire people to seek out information and all that kind of stuff. But he can't be compared to a W.E.B. DuBois or a Stokely Carmichael. He just simply can't. And that brings me to this point about the nationalist Pan-Africanists versus the socialist Pan-Africanists. I talked about like how those brothers Du Bois and Kwame Ture were organizers, how they actually put in work, and they were socialists as well. I mean, the bourgeois nationalist doesn't have any problem with capitalism. They just want a piece of the pie. They want to participate in capitalism. And they don't understand that capitalism is the root of the problems that we face. It is because of capitalism that we were enslaved. If you read the book by Eric Williams called Capitalism and Slavery, you will understand all the economic incentives behind the slave trade. You will find out about how they created the racist ideology to justify the brutality and the horrific crimes that they were committing against Black people. So, the argument that racism has nothing to do with capitalism or that there's no connection, I just think that that's just proven to be false, given the fact that you have a ruling class that, first of all, used racism to justify the enslavement of African people. You have a ruling class that continues to use racism to divide working class people, middle class people, and poor people. And by keeping the masses of the people divided, they may remain on top. The 1%, the ruling class in this country remains on top. And until you deal with that class structure, until you deal with this economic system, you're not talking about anything revolutionary. If you're not talking about dealing with the system, dealing with the class structure in the society, you're just talking about reforms, or even worse, you're talking about conservative ideas that don't even challenge the system at all, don't even try to create any kind of real change. And that's what you have with a lot of these bourgeois cultural nationalists. They're not threatening the system. They're not challenging the capitalist order in this country. In fact, all they're doing is finding their niche within it. That's why these people don't even pose a threat to the system. There's a reason why groups like the Black Panther Party were targeted, because they pose a threat to this order, to this system. So, that's one thing that I want to talk about. So I don't think that racism is just rooted in this idea of people fearing genetic annihilation. There's financial incentive behind racism. Racism is a tool of imperialism and capitalism. And I think that that's something that people neglect. And I'm not saying that socialism cures racism or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. You have racism that continues to exist even in a place like Cuba or whatever. But you actually have an effort of those societies to actually eliminate racism by eliminating class as well. And that brings me to this whole point about Fidel Castro. This brother Umar Johnson said that Fidel Castro was a racist. And the only thing he offered to prove that point was the fact that Fidel Castro allegedly said that we must address the class structure in society before we go ahead and address the race issue. First of all, I don't even know if that statement is true. Second of all, there are ties between class and race. If you look at the disproportionate poverty in the Black community, when you look at the class dynamics in the Black community, I mean, it's apparent that there's a correlation between race and class. So, I just think that that is a very weak argument to make to try to prove that Fidel Castro is a racist. First of all, Fidel Castro has done more for African people and Black people than many people have. I mean, his country supported liberation movements on the African continent. His country supported the war against the apartheid South African regime. That's what his country did. That's what Fidel Castro did. At a time when the United States was investing in apartheid South Africa, defending apartheid South Africa, providing aid and assistance to apartheid South Africa, Fidel Castro was aiding the revolutionaries, aiding people like Nelson Mandela, ANC, and Pan-African National Congress and other organizations. So I just think that it's ridiculous to call Fidel Castro a racist. I mean, especially given the fact that he gave black revolutionaries asylum in Cuba, people who were persecuted in the United States and were forced to flee the country. They were able to go to Cuba. Cuba provided them with sanctuary. So it is just outright preposterous and ridiculous for this man to say that Fidel Castro is a racist. And I will include a link in the cards so that you can see an earlier video that I did like months back when Fidel Castro passed away, just laying out this history that Fidel Castro was a part of, a progressive history, an anti-racist history. So it's just flat out ridiculous to suggest that Fidel Castro is a racist. Another point that he made was this. He said Fidel Castro was an Italian. That's just straight up false. That's another false statement that he made during his presentation. I will include a link to the Wikipedia page that points out how Fidel Castro's father was from Spain and his mother was from Spain, but Fidel Castro was born in Cuba. And we know that Cuba is a Spanish colony. That's why they speak Spanish there. We know that the people in Cuba are descendants from slaves and, other groups of people, the native peoples, plus European ancestry. So Cuba is a racially diverse and mixed country. And Fidel Castro was a Spanish. His father was Spanish and his mother was Spanish. And he was born in Cuba. He was not an Italian. Even though he's a European, he wasn't an Italian. So, I mean, that's just a false statement. And I don't know why he would include false statements in his interview. Like maybe he just made a mistake. Perhaps it's a mistake. But that just calls into question everything when you have all these false statements. The false statements that were pointed out by the Root and the false statements that I just pointed out. So those are my thoughts about this. Don't get me wrong. I don't despise this brother or anything like that. I just have differences of opinion with him on some issues. And that's okay. I mean, you have debates in the black community. You had the debate between W.E.B. DuBois and Booker T. Washington. You had the debate between DuBois and Marcus Garvey. You had the debate between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Debate is fine. This notion that we should be quote unquote on code and all this other stuff and not have any kind of debates or any kind of differences is just stupid. I mean, to sum it up, man, it's just stupid. It's not consistent with any people's tradition. I mean, you're going to have differences of opinion, and it's fine to debate ideas and let those ideas win out in the marketplace of ideas and on the merits. So those are my thoughts. Tell me what y'all think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.